Good morning, I'm WaywornWyrm, and welcome to my channel. And welcome to Hoard of the Dragon Queen, Episode 3, From Fire to Fire. The group rushed into the ready room for the sally port and found themselves face to face with a human, 4 kobolds, and a large drake. Quora was the first to act. Sort of panicking at the surprise of seeing the room filled with creatures, she shot off a magic missile at the drake. As the spell went off, a surge of magic filled the room and briefly connected each person and creature in the room to her with purple cords. And each person and the drake seemed to slightly wither, while the kobolds withered away completely and died. She felt this rush of rejuvenating energy surge through her before it dissipated. The acolyte looked in horror at Quora after such a powerful display of magic and cast a spell of healing on itself before starting to back toward the door. The drake roared in surprise and jumped at Quora, trying to bite her, but she was able to dodge out of the way as she saw and heard the large jaws snap shut so close to her she felt the wind from the action. Garrett pulled out his short sword and stabbed at the drake, burying the sword into its hard flank before removing it. Uthal pulled both of his swords out and also attacked the drake. It was the biggest creature in the room, and he deemed it to be the biggest threat as well. However, after Garrett's attacks, the drake was thrashing around and biting and slashing at everyone close to it, and Uthal was unable to get a strike in. Tess saw the acolyte for what it was, a healer and the leader of this particular attack, and she pulled out her greatsword and strode toward the acolyte. Swinging her sword high above her head, she brought it down on the robed person, and when her sword hit the ground, the body did as well, and it did not move. Morn shot a mote of frost from his staff at the drake. Frost played over its scales and stuck for a few seconds. Mara brought a gout of flame down from the heavens, but before it could smote the drake managed to slide out of the way, and the flame just scorched the stone floor of the small room. Quora shot a mote of frost from her hand and managed to get the drake right as it was snapping at her again, and the mote traveled down its gullet before coating its insides with frost, killing the beast. With the battle finished, Quora began to cast mending on the door. She knew it would take several minutes, and the rest of the group set up a small perimeter just outside the door as she was fixing it. As she was casting the spell for the 5th and final time, another group of cultists came up to try and keep the sally port open. This time, it was 4 humans and 4 kobolds. Morn started the fight with casting Burning Hands, causing flames to play over the entire group of foes. The heavily armored man with a spear and shield, one of the robed cultists, and all 4 of the kobolds were killed by the flames. Even though 2 of the kobolds were able to avoid most of the flames, it was just too much for them. And the armored human and the cultist were directly in the path of the flames. Morn then retreated into the room behind the door. "Quora, I hope you're almost done. We're being attacked out there." Quora nodded curtly and impatiently at Morn's words. I know, I'm going as fast as I can. Another 30 or so seconds, and this door will be good as new. I promise." The 2 remaining cultists considered their options before they ran away. One gout of flame from the mage killed almost the entire attacking force, and they decided not only was it not worth it due to their injuries and the deaths of the others, but they realized they wouldn't be able to hold the sally port even if they somehow won, despite being outnumbered and extremely hurt. The rest of the group followed Morn into the sally port ready room after the attackers quickly left, and as they were finishing, Cora finished mending the door, and they sealed it. Mara walked over to Morn. I know we all got hurt by Cora's chaotic magical blast, but it looks like you are the worst off, so here. And with that, she cast a spell of healing onto Morn. As she finished her spell, he seemed to go back to normal. Thank you, Mara, he said gruffly. With that, they exited the walls into the inner courtyard, feeling good about themselves. Until they heard the screams. The dragon was swooping low, and lightning danced across the battlement, striking 3 guards dead and injuring another. Morn, seeing one of his childhood friends be struck dead by the lightning, rushed up the stairs to the top of the battlement, but by the time he had gotten there, the dragon had swooped back into the air, out of range of all but his magic missile spell. He considered casting it, but he knew he was almost out of magic until he rested and recuperated, and there was no telling what else they would face that night. It was only nearly midnight. So he found an area semi-protected from above and crouched down under the thatched roof and waited. Tess watched the dragon and just stood there, rooted to the spot, her sword dragging on the ground. The immense size and the tactics of this horrid blue monstrosity kept her frozen as she watched what she knew would kill them all. The group and everyone in the keep. Garrett had no issue with fear, shaking it off after only a moment as he followed Morn up the stairs. He did this before realizing he had no means of attacking a dragon so high up. His darts would not be able to fly that far. He simply stood defiantly on the parapet and shouted up at the dragon, "You have no power here! This keep will stand to your attacks as a cliff stands against the waves." Uthal stood next to Tess. Fear, an emotion he was quite unfamiliar with, washed over him, and he watched the dragon in awe and terror. He could kill humanoids, no problem. But facing down a creature that would blot out the moon as it passed between the moon and himself was more than he had even ever tried to face. Mara gritted her teeth against the fear, knowing it was not just normal fear from their position, but also a magical fear that emanated from dragons. She pulled out her light crossbow and followed both Morn and Garrett up to the battlement. Unlike the two of them, she could attack the dragon. She knelt down and steadied her crossbow on the parapet, tracking the dragon's semi-erratic flight as it dodged the myriad of arrows being shot by the guards. For a few seconds, before she fired. The bolt went far wide of her target. There was simply too much space between her and it to be very effective. Cora stayed with Uthal and Tess, unable to shake the fear seizing her. Her mind raced with thoughts about what her grandfather would think if he saw her there. A member of the Maravaldis, letting others fight a dragon for them. Morn peeked out from under the roof to watch the dragon for a few seconds, seeing if it would close in, and got ready to fire a mote of frost at it if it did. Tess saw half of her group joining the frightened guards on the battlement, and she shook off her fear. There was no time for fear. There was only time for saving as many as she could. She sheathed her sword and ran up the stairs. At the top, she pulled out one of her javelins, and putting everything she had into it, she cocked back and threw. She watched as it arced over the dragon and sailed off into the night. Garrett continued to watch the dragon, shouting its doom. Come down here and let me show you the best cuts of dragon. I've heard that dragon thighs are particularly good. He held the dart at the ready in case the dragon decided to take him up on his offer. Uthal continued to stay rooted to his spot. Sure, he was a folk hero to some, but those were peasants who had fought back against a tyrannical governor. He was a blacksmith, not a dragon slayer. With gritted teeth, Mara reloaded her crossbow, re-steadied herself, and fired another time. This time was much closer. It was simply bad luck that the dragon banked right as the bolt was about to hit it. She was sure it had slid against the scales of the dragon as it flew by. With a speed unexpected, the dragon swooped down again, lining up a strafing run of the far side of the battlements. Before it could commit to the run, Morn's frost mote shot from his staff and struck the dragon right where its wing met its size, freezing the joint for a couple of seconds, in which time the dragon faltered in its flight before regaining control. Right as it was regaining control, one of Garrett's darts shot into its wing and punched a tiny hole in it. Lightning played along the battlement for a second time. This time, only killing 2 outright, but 6 more were injured as they dived out of the way. As it flew back into the sky, it just kept flying, and seemingly left the area. Uthal and Quora quickly got over their terror and joined the group once the dragon left. The 6 of them ran around the battlements to the area where Governor Nighthill was, and seeing that he was okay, they sagged in relief. The governor stepped out from under the small room in the tower he had been in during the attack and looked over the group. Thank you so much for doing that. My men have been shooting arrows at the dragon for hours now, to no effect. I'm glad we were able to weather that attack fairly easily. I'm afraid, after this, we'll not have much in the way of guards. But only 5 died, and 7 injured. The other attacks have been much longer and had much more death. Please rest some before your next mission. You have done much for us, and we are happy for your assistance. Thank you so much for listening to the 3rd episode of Hoard of the Dragon Queen. Make sure you tune in on Tuesday, March 13th for episode 4, Saving the Mill. And also, make sure you tune in tomorrow for our next episode of the Monster Manual Backward.